Professor Manfred Weiss from Frankfurt University. He is going to talk about the legal preconditions for valuable work.
Well, good evening, everybody. As you can see, I stand here because people say with my size it doesn't make a difference whether I sit or stand, and I prefer to stand. First of all, I would like to thank my friends for having invited me again. It's always a great pleasure to be here in Bergamo, and for me it's a special pleasure because I used to be a very close friend of Marco Biaggi, and here they work for the legacy of Marco, and I'm grateful for that. Well, John Butt just told us that money is a key motivation for workers to work. I agree with him. But we also know quite well that money, remuneration, wage, however we want to call it, is only one element, even if a very important one, of valuable work. And if I say valuable work, I look at it from the perspective of the worker. There are many more dimensions. We could say, in general terms, that valuable work is work which respects human dignity, or which leads to job satisfaction, or with which the worker can identify. All this is correct, but it doesn't say anything, because it's much too general, much too broad. And therefore, I think we have to look what kind of subcategories are there which make work valuable. And from my perspective, I'm a law person. I want to reflect what kind of legal preconditions do we need to make work valuable. Of course, I cannot give you a comprehensive list. Otherwise, we would sit here until midnight, and I'm told I only have a few minutes. But I will give you some examples. I will not talk about examples which everybody talks about and which are highly regulated already, as, for example, the prohibition of discrimination or the guarantee of workers' privacy. These are, of course, basic elements of valuable work. I will look at some aspects which are not so much in the limelight, but which have turned out to be extremely important, in particular in these times of transformation of work, as we see it all the time in the period of digitalization and decarbonization, and which also has proved to be relevant and important in this terrible pandemic. Well, let me first take an aspect which has turned out, if you look through the literature, to be extremely important. For workers, work is valuable, and this is an element, an important element of it, if they get the training to be skilled enough to really cope with all the challenges of the work, not only using, for example, technology, but being able to appropriate technology. And this is very difficult because it means that we have to adapt all the time to the changes and challenges of what's happening today and in the future. And this means lifelong learning for all. And I stress for all, because as you may know, the recent report of the ILO Global Commission on the Future of Work tells us there is continuous learning. There is continuous training, but for the happy few. For those who are already trained, they get even more trained, and the rest gets nothing. And this is something we can't have in the future, and we will not have valuable work for many, many people. Therefore, the challenge is lifelong learning for all. But this raises many, many questions. The first problem is, how do we organize the access? Do we get an individual right to each worker to get such training? Or do we work with incentives? Not only for workers, but also for employers, because they sometimes are also quite reluctant in this respect. This is very difficult. And then the next question is, how shall we share the costs? Who shall pay for this? And there the Global Commission had a wonderful idea. They suggest a so-called employment assurance, not unemployment insurance, employment insurance, where all contribute and where then it might be easier to finance all this. And let's be honest. This kind of training is also something which is not only valuable for those who get it, but for the society as such. And therefore the question is, why do we not pay it by the tax system? All these are questions which are totally unresolved. Then, of course, the question is, when shall we get this training? During working hours? Shall be there specific sabbaticals? All this is not yet decided. As you can see, and I would like to make this point, de-skilling and the need for reskilling of workers are the characteristic phenomena of modern working life, and the needs of a comprehensive strategy of continued training is evident. Labor law has to significantly reconceptualize all the concept of training, but this is only in an embryonic stage so far. Let me go to the second aspect, which I would like to mention. And this is, and you may say, well, this is nothing new, this is banal, job security. But if I talk about job security, I talk about the possibility of worker, which makes his work valuable, to plan one's life in a mid and long-term perspective. This means that we not only should focus on protection against unfair dismissal, of course, that's important, but it's not the only thing. Even if I should mention that unfortunately we have neglected that, because since 2 decades we have a new philosophy which is no longer talking about job security but about employment security. It's not important to keep your workplace, it's important that you get a smooth transfer to another job. That's not wrong, that's quite a good idea, but it should not be to the detriment of job security. And I'm not only staying with job security, I also would like to mention that we should be careful, much more careful, to have fixed-term jobs, because fixed-term jobs are dramatic for the workers, because the worker not only knows, I don't know what's happening afterwards, but the worker is inclined to do everything what the employer wants in order to get a job. And this kind of behavior then is not something which increases the solidarity between the workers at the workplace, and this leads to enormous conflicts. Therefore, forget about fixed-term contracts. They only should be there as an exceptional tool, not as a regular tool, in my view. The same is true for temporary work, with the temporary work agencies. If I look at this directives we have on fixed-term work and on the temporary agency work, they, in my view, are not the right way to deal with these problems. We have to be much more restrictive. I want to be not misunderstood. I'm not saying we should prohibit fixed-term contracts, and I'm not saying we should prohibit temporary work. I only say we should be much more careful with it and should be much more restrictive, which unfortunately is not happening. Well, a next element which I would like to mention, which was mentioned in all kind of workshops today, is the possibility to organize a decent work-life balance. And there, of course, we could think of many basic elements which might lead to that kind of goal. I only would like to mention one. And the one I would like to mention is there should be more internal flexibility, as I would call it. What do I mean? There should be an easy way for workers to change from full-time to part-time and from part-time to full-time. This, of course, creates problems. It creates problems of remuneration. It creates problems of pension. But I think it's very, very basic. Since in my country, in Germany, we have the possibility to go from full-time to part-time and from part-time then back to full-time, and to have a right to do this, which only in exceptional cases can be refused by the employer, things are much better than they were before. Well, and now I come to my favorite area, the working time, which was also dealt with several times today. On the one hand, there is no doubt, working time flexibility. That's what the workers want. And on the other hand, the possibility to full, and here I mean mental and physical, detachment of work, to have nothing to do with work, to just have free time. Well, since in many workplaces nowadays, it's much more important to achieve goals than to be present in the company. Of course, the time frame has got a very new meaning compared to what it was before. And of course, workers are interested in having lots of autonomy, yeah. And this, of course, is particularly true when you have homework or something like this. But the big question is, do we really have to get away from maximum time, daily maximum time, weekly maximum time, rest periods, breaks, and all these kind of things, which were made because to guarantee and save your health? Because if we give too much autonomy, this autonomy is dangerous, it's ambiguous. Why is it ambiguous? Because as we see from many, many cases now, in particular, we have learned it through this pandemic, the danger is self-exploitation. And therefore, I think we need clear-cut rules that the working time has to stop sometime every day, and also at a maximum level in the week. Of course, if you are sitting at home and you have your computer, it's very difficult to stop or to not answer the phone when you are phoned by the employer and so on. Therefore, what we need is, and we have it already in quite a few countries, we need cut downs of the systems, which of course cannot be done everywhere. Imagine, the pandemic will tell you what it would mean if you would have such a system in a hospital, then this would be a catastrophe. We can't do it everywhere, but it's a first step, and we have to think of mechanism which might combine the need of flexibility and the need to have maximum levels in order to preserve your health. We have no solution so far. It's very, very difficult. Many people are thinking of this, but it's very necessary to find something. If I talk about health and safety, let me make at least, I could talk for hours now on health and safety, which I don't do, but let me at least make one, or give you one example, which in my view is very important and which we have learned how important it is through this pandemic. If I speak to people, and I do it quite often, who work in the healthcare system in my country, and I ask them and I say, well, if you get more money, will you be happy? And they say, well, you have no idea. Money is not so important. For us, it would be important to have a possibility to breathe, a possibility to really do something for the patient, to not be all the time on stress. But we can't do it because we don't have enough people. It's just not possible to do it anymore. And therefore, I think what we really badly need, and I know how problematic it is something for which in Germany we have a wonderful word, which I cannot translate in English. I haven't found a translation. It's called Stellenschlüssel, which means, I explain what it is. It means that you have to have a certain minimum amount of people for performing a task. Only then you can make sure that people can perform their work and their tasks in a dignified way. But I have to tell you, from a legal point of view, this is relatively easy to put in paper, but it might remain law in the books. For example, one of the lessons we learned in the pandemic was to have such a mechanism for the people in the healthcare service. But the problem is, in the moment, we would need more than 100,000 people, to just meet the lowest level of these standards. We don't have these people. The other way around. More and more people are leaving the healthcare service because the conditions are as they are, and they have nothing to do with money. So you see, it's very problematic. And how much time do I have? Oh, he's strict. But as a German, I tell him all the time, have to be stricter, so I have to behave. Okay, well, the last thing I would like to tell you is, and what for me is basic, is something which already the founding fathers of labor law understood as essential for a dignified and valuable workplace. And that's a democratic workplace. And what do I mean by democratic workplace? I mean that there is not unilateral decision-making by management, but there is a possibility for workers to influence management decisions, be it by information and consultation, be it by vetoes, be it by co-determination, whatever it is. But it is important that workers do not have to feel being an object of those decisions, but they have to feel being a subject of influencing these decisions. And in so far, work is also a school for political democracy in society. It's very, very important. And I tell you, it was never more important than now. Because we are, as I already said in the beginning, we are in a transformation phase where we have to meet all kinds of new challenges which might be burdensome for workers. And this needs lots of acceptability. And you only will get this kind of acceptability if you can give the workers the feeling that they have a say in what is happening here, and it's not only a unilateral decision by management. These were only very few examples of where I think we need legal instruments to make sure that all this can happen. Much is to be done in this area. And let me close by saying, not everything, of course, can be legally regulated, which is important for workers to make work valuable. Let me give two examples and then I stop, I promise. First example. Workers are very much afraid of having work which is too monotonous, which is always the same. They want to have some variety. This, of course, is something which human resources people should think of. It's not something for us law people, you know. And the same is true for the other example which I would like to give. Having spoken in my long life to so many workers, you know, they always tell me, I would like to know what the worth of my part is, what I do in relation to the end product or to the end service which is provided. This again is something which could be provided by an intelligent and fair human resource management, but it will not be provided by law. In other words, what I told you were a few elements where I think law can play a role, but there are many others and much has to be done. Thank you for your attention.